Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that shines the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith, and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. On today's podcast, I've invited Joshua Washington, son of Dumasani Washington, who we hosted on our podcast last week. We will continue our conversation on the recent Barna poll that highlighted a dramatic drop in young evangelical Christian support for Israel. You won't hear this perspective in mainstream or alternative media. Now, if you missed last week's podcast, you will find it in our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org. That's pjtn.org. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Our goal at PJTN is to equip you to stand against the disinformation by taking back local control of your community and your children's and grandchildren's education. Remember to visit our website daily to receive updates on all of PJTN's groundbreaking initiatives and programs, and sign up to receive PJTN's media and action alerts to share with family and friends. As PJTN Watchmen, your action could mean all the difference in the success of our global mission. So please help me spread this vital information today. God told the prophet Obadiah that in the last days he would wipe out the descendants of Edom because they stood by while their brother Jacob was held in captivity and did nothing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have a Christian leader who is a Zionist and lover of Israel. His name is Joshua Washington. He is the executive director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. He graduated from University of Pacific's Conservatory of Music in Stockton, California. Joshua writes and speaks extensively on Zionism and civil rights, seeking to strengthen the Black and Jewish relationship in the U.S. He has been featured in Times of Israel and has spoken and collaborated on many platforms, including Camera, Stand With Us, Americans for Peace and Tolerance, and the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He is also a contributor to two books, Israelphobia and the West, The Hijacking of Civil Discourse on Israel and How to Rescue It, and The Casualty of Contempt, The Alarming Rise of Antisemitism and What Can Be Done to Stop It. Joshua and his wife, Olga, have been married 3 years and have 2 children. Joshua, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Laurie.
We are so honored to have you. And to our audience, I have to tell you, this young man is our pride and joy because of his love for Israel, his love of the scriptures. He knows the scriptures very well. You know, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, Joshua. You are just like your dad and just as passionate. And it's really exciting for those of us who are getting up there in our years to see young people coming behind us and picking up this cause and fighting to protect our Jewish brethren, defend the state of Israel according to what God says in his word. So let's get started. So Joshua, the first thing I want to talk to you about is how you came to love Israel. And, you know, I think it wouldn't be too far removed to say that your parents had a major influence in that direction. But what was it? Because really our kids grow up and they have to own their own faith. They have to choose their own path. What was it that caused you to pick up this mantle and carry it to build this relationship of love with Israel, the Jewish people, and the Black community?
Well, Laurie, for me, and you're absolutely right that we were raised in a household, my sisters and I, that had a deep affinity and appreciation for the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. As Christians, knowing that there would be no Christianity if there wasn't for Judaism. There would be no Christianity if it wasn't for the Jewish people. And those roots are deep.
Hmm.
And so that was something that was a normal thing in our house. It was a normal thing in our house to not only for my dad to teach us out of the word and for us to worship together, but for him to teach us the Hebrew roots of our faith as we're learning different scriptures and as we're learning different stories and so I grew up just it was always a normal thing to me. I didn't think that we were necessarily special or different in that way.
Hmm.
Um, it wasn't really until I went to college really and started to kind of see how up until I went to college, I wasn't really aware of Israel, like modern day Israel. I wasn't
Hmm.
really, in tune with what was going on and what was going on the ground. And
Right.
my first time being exposed to what was happening in Israel was actually when I don't know what group it was on my college campus, but I remember as a freshman, I saw flyers up in the practice rooms where I was practicing piano. I came out, I saw a flyer that said that there was going to be a fundraiser for the Palestinians in Gaza because they were being bombarded by bombs by Israel.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I didn't know what to think. I saw it and something didn't feel right to me, but I didn't know. I had no idea. That was my first time even really thinking about modern day Israel. I was like, wow, I guess Israel, it is a place today. I mean,
Hmm.
I had never even really thought about it. And um, from there, you know, I began to ask questions. I remember talking to my father a lot, and I remember around that same time was when my father started getting a little bit more involved with Christians United for Israel. He wasn't on staff yet, but he was playing in one of the bands that played at the Night to Honor Israel's in California, and I went to my first Night to Honor Israel, and like something lit a fire in me, Laurie. It's
Mm.
not only did it inspire. There's a song that I wrote back then that really had no idea what it meant or what it, all the references and things like that. But I still perform it today because it means so much more to me now than it did when I first wrote it. But not only that, but it just really kind of lit this fire under me to just do as much as I could to know what was happening in today's Israel. And so I began
Mhm.
reading. I began to talk to people that I knew who were experts. I talked to, because of social media, I was able to talk to Israelis. I was able to reach out to the Ethiopian Israeli community, people living in Israel, and I kind of got into this habit of whenever I saw something on the news, I would immediately go and try to verify it, with people that I knew in the area.
Mhm.
And that's when I started to see how the mainstream media is very biased. That I kind of got to see it firsthand. That wow, every time I see these stories, I'll talk to people on the ground, and it's sometimes very very different from what millions of people just watched, on the news or heard someone say or write on in an article. And so um, yeah, and then the biggest thing, Laura, that really set it off for me was seeing how there were there was this hijacking of the Black American legacy,
Mhm.
in the name of quote unquote solidarity. And so you had anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian activists who were linked arms with, whether it's some people in the Black student unions or just other Black students on college campuses, Black activists, and them
Mhm.
kind of, not only standing against Israel, but kind of framing it to be this righteous struggle,
Mhm.
and that angered me. I mean, that angered me as a Black man. That angered me as a Christian. to see this kind of organized stance against Israel. And so
Mhm.
those things, kind of put together, kind of are what made me stand up and speak out more.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting because you talked about your experience on the campus in college, and I'm sure you confronted the Black Hebrew movement and the Black Liberation Theology movement, but also BDS because your family comes from South Africa, and so you probably were raised growing up and understanding apartheid and seeing the false accusations, like with the whole boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, suggesting that Israel's an apartheid state. Tell us how that influenced even your messaging, knowing what the truth was about apartheid and that Israel wasn't it.
Absolutely. So before I met my wife, because my wife and all my in-laws, you're right, are South African. So I call myself an adoptive son of Africa because I have so much family there now. But
Hmm.
before I met my wife and her family, my my father and my mother were really good friends with a lady named Noma Timba, and we called her Malume, which means auntie in Zulu.
Hmm.
And she actually was one of the ones who helped my dad find helped my dad to find his new name. Dumisani wasn't his birth name, and she's very close to the family. And I remember as a kid, I must have been maybe 8 or 9. She would at the time she would visit us from time to time from Connecticut because that's where she lived. It's where she actually fled, and she would just I remember she just told stories. I mean, we learned so much from her, but she would just talk about what it was like in apartheid South Africa.
Hmm.
And, not tying it to, there were at this point, nothing about Israel, right? We were just learning about South Africa, but I grew up, knowing, um, I think having a little bit of a better understanding than most kids in America, I would say, about what apartheid was, just because we had her to share with us some very personal stories.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, years later, I meet Olga, and she's already speaking out about this. Her father, my father-in-law, who is the president of the African Christian Democratic Party, he's been very vocal about this for a while. So being able to actually meet other Black South Africans who, after hearing myself that Israel was an apartheid state, seeing other Black South Africans that were vehemently opposing that was refreshing, because
Hmm.
there are a lot of times in this fight where I felt like me and my family were the only ones. We were the only Black people who stood with Israel, and this was before my dad had discovered the Black American Supporting Israel Committee, which was a civil rights group in the 70s that supported Israel. People who were Dr. King's closest confidants started
Hmm.
this organization in his name. This is before we discovered all this stuff, and
Hmm.
it was tough. But meeting those, being able to first follow them and then meeting them, obviously, eventually marrying my wife now. I can see now how God has kind of threaded these things together throughout my life, so that we can be a voice. Because yeah, that is BDS's biggest talking point is that
Hmm.
they use that whole boycott thing because that was the word that we use with apartheid South Africa in the 90s. Especially Black Americans were boycotting businesses that would do business with apartheid South Africa. And so
Hmm.
it's effective, but it's a lie, and we continue to speak out against that.
Yes. When I was in South Africa in 2019 and we hosted our conference about this whole issue of Israel being accused of being an apartheid state, I got to meet Reverend Meshway. And I understand you have a connection, a personal connection to him.
Absolutely. He is my father-in-law. Yes, ma'am.
And that's an amazing thing because he has been an incredible leader there in South Africa in support of Israel. He's appeared on several documentary films, one of which was one of ours and one of our Focus on Israel shows because of his incredible story, his own testimony about his love for Israel and how Israel is not an apartheid state. He spoke up condemning it. And so you have it's amazing, as you said, how God has thread the people in your life in such an amazing way for you to be able to step into this incredible mission that God has called you to carry on to the next generation this truth and this love for Israel as a believer. It was shocking to me to see the silence of the Christian church in South Africa when Israel was being accused of being an apartheid state. And when Durban happened, there was no outrage from the church, at least not. I mean, there may have been, one or two voices, but there was no condemnation from the church that this is a lie, that this is, in violation of the ninth commandment, bearing false witness against your brother. But when we spoke to the pastors when we were there, they all agreed they should have spoken up because their silence spoke loudly.
No, I was just going to say you're absolutely right. I mean, there was I think globally, there was a general not taking the Durban conference seriously. I think that a lot of people didn't think that this kind of labeling on Israel would gain traction.
Mm-hmm.
But that is how disinformation works, is that it usually starts off as the minority voice, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so persistent. It's so persistent, and all it really needs is for just the smallest number of people to believe it, and then sometimes it takes decades, but it can catch on and grow. And I think now what we're seeing, unfortunately, we're playing catch up now. We're playing catch up to all this stuff. But you're absolutely right. Is that when it first came out, that accusation about Israel being an apartheid state first came out, too many people just dismissed it because it is a lie. But but I think there wasn't enough of an urgency to shoot it down, because at the time it was just it was just a small thing. It was just a one statement that most people didn't really listen to at the time.
Right. Right. No, you're absolutely right. And I think the mindset was, don't draw any attention to it and it'll just go away. And unfortunately, they used it to fan the flames and continue to do so. In fact, I understand there's supposed to be another conference coming up at the United Nations, or the UN is hosting something about Durban in September, this coming September. So we're going to be prepared and get out ahead of it with our conference, which will take place August 30th and 31st. And we're excited that you're going to be able to participate in that as well. So, Joshua, let's get to the report, the article of the report that came out by the Barna Group, and hearing about the 50% drop in support of young evangelicals for Israel in the last 3 years. And because you are a young evangelical leader, tell the audience your thoughts about this dramatic drop, because it does look like, from what they did with this poll and the survey. I didn't get to see all the questions. We don't know all the demographics about these young evangelicals because that wasn't included in the article. But 50% drop is significant in support for Israel by our young people in the last 3 years. That dropped. And what are your thoughts about that? Do you think that this is a legitimate assessment or survey, or is it representative of the majority of young evangelicals in America, do you think?
So, Laurie, I think that when it comes to, so first of all, if we were talking about older evangelicals, I would say no, I don't think that's representative of most of them. I do believe that statistic is accurate when it comes to younger ones, and I'll tell you why. Because for me, I think when I was in college, and not just on my campus, but visiting other campuses as well, and being a part of different things as both a worship leader and doing other music as well. I think I was kind of in that transition of, no one was actively coming against Israel or the Jewish people. That's not what it was. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that there was this, and there still is, a sort of fickleness amongst young evangelicals,
Mm-hmm.
at least the ones with the biggest followings. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I happen to know a lot of young evangelicals around my age that are doing amazing work, but I just mean the ones that are the most out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that they're, and not to come against them, but I'm just telling the truth. Their sermons oftentimes are not not really biblically based. They
Mm-hmm.
might be good ideas or things that sound great, um,
Mm-hmm.
but and often there's kind of like this uh, aversion to diving deep into the word, into Torah, into the prophets, and
Mm-hmm.
um, wrestling with different things, and they tend to, if they do speak on controversial topics, it's because the topic has gotten so big it's unavoidable, and
Right.
they wind up kind of lukewarm, not really standing their ground on issues. And so this has been happening for a while. So the church, kids coming up in the church, this is part of why, at least in the Black church, there is it's smaller, but it's a growing number of Black people who are leaving the church for Black Hebrew Israelites or for Nation of Islam.
Mm.
Because what is happening is that, for a number of different reasons, either the pastor just is pastor is unaware of some of these other scriptures, or often, like I said, that depending on what church they go to, they're not learning anything really solid. These
Right.
other people come in and they'll challenge the pastor, they'll challenge the people who are there, they'll see them in the streets, and they'll quote to them scriptures that they've never heard before, and then say, for instance, based on this scripture in Deuteronomy 28, all black Americans are the real Jews, and white
Mm-hmm.
and people who are Ashkenazi are not real Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what Deuteronomy 28 is saying. There's no
Mm-hmm.
allusion to that. But because if I, as a Christian, have never even seen those scriptures before, and I do see a couple of things that might be considered parallels,
Mm-hmm.
they just completely blew my doors off. I have no idea how to respond, and
Mm.
that's a lot of that is happening right now, where people are being confronted with these things that they really should have been taught correctly at some point, but they
Mm-hmm.
never were taught at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then the same things happen when we get to college, and I think that if you're not prepared to, I think whether you're in college or anywhere else, if you haven't been prepared to, if you haven't been told that you may not make the friends that you would like to make because you're Christian, or that people may come against you just because of a stance you take, and you're going to have to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
You come to college and you really don't want to make waves. That's not what
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to do. And so I think the college culture has become, let's not say or do anything too controversial. But the problem is that the kids who graduate step into a world where then they've learned to kind of just go with the flow.
Right.
And so I personally have seen, people I know who have completely just become, very left political, quote unquote Christians, if you want to call it that, who kind of
Mm-hmm.
just kind of put the Bible on whatever belief that the world is saying is a good thing. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's for me. I saw the early signs of it. I was too young to kind of know where it was going, but it just, there are times when that just didn't feel right to me, that, okay, this, we have to, why aren't we taking, I know it's controversial, but we can't just not say anything, or we can't just say that this is all right, and that's where we were, I think that's where we were headed. And so that statistic is not a surprise to me, I should say now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the verse in Judges chapter 2:10, where it says that there arose a generation who knew not the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And certainly, we're talking about a specific demographic. We're not talking about, the mainline Christianity, because we expect, the youth, or even, any congregant of the mainstream, to be more doctrinally, theologically based, as opposed to evangelical Christians who really have their name as evangelicals. It's really a dual meaning, meaning that evangelical Christians typically are Bible believers. They believe, from Genesis to Revelation and everything in between, and that they want to share their faith. But I think the definition really has morphed into more the latter, being biblically based and having a good knowledge of the scriptures, even the Hebrew text and the prophets, along with the New Testament. But no, it was shocking to me to see the difference in numbers just in 3 years, because considering, that these kids were raised in a evangelical Christian home, and, whether it's within the Black congregation, evangelical church, or whether it's the white, Caucasian, Asian, we're not doing a good enough job in preparing our kids to be able to stand in the days that are coming. I mean, our faith is being tested. We are being tested and hard pressed on every side. And if we do not equip our kids with biblical truth, they're going to fall for anything that comes, down the pike, which is really, really, really sad. But there's another interesting aspect of the recent survey where over 22% responded that Israel does not treat Palestinians fairly. There were over 35% who were neutral on this, and while a polarity of 41% said that Israel treats Palestinians fairly, which I thought was interesting, that in itself. But the survey, it was noted that historically those evangelicals have supported Israel based on their end-time theology, connecting the creation of the state of Israel with the second coming of the Messiah. Do you believe that is true, or do you think that the young evangelicals have a different perspective, that it's not so much the creation of the Jewish state like your dad's and my generation? We were, we looked at Israel as the time clock, and we were watching our watches. And of course, Israel becoming a state after 2,000 years of not existing and coming back. Do you think that plays a role in how young evangelicals perceive Israel?
Laurie, I haven't found that to be the case amongst young evangelicals who do support Israel. I think that, as Christians, obviously we do want to see the Messiah return. We do want to see Jesus come back. And but when it comes to our support for Israel, I think a lot of us, one, we understand the scriptures, we understand the prophecies about Israel being reborn. We understand what Deuteronomy talks about, even as God is laying out the curses to the Israelite people for if they turn away from his word. He even says then that, but at the end of all that, he'll still gather them and bring them back, even if they're scattered to the farthest horizons. He will gather them back to their land. And so we see what's happening now as a fulfillment of God's word. And there's it's unprecedented. There's no other people on earth in history that can say that they've done what the Jewish people have done, or what God has done with Jewish people in rebuilding Israel, and having them return to the land. And so, we also understand, I think many of us do, that no man knows the day or the hour that Jesus is going to come back. And so we know that this is maybe one of the signs, but I think that sometimes I think that the end times kind of emphasis on pro-Israel Christians is a label that gets really blown up and placed on Christians as a way to kind of create a divide between Christians and Jews, between pro-Israel Christians and Jews. There is a small, I mean, honest, and to be very honest with you, in my maybe 12 years of being in the space, not necessarily active, but in the pro-Israel space, I've only seen two people who have said, literally two people who have said that no, we support Israel because we want the Messiah to come faster.
Yeah.
Um, and those were they're on the same day. They were with each other at an event, and everyone was very uncomfortable, both Christians and Jews, because
Mm-hmm.
we didn't want, obviously, that to be the impression of the Jewish people that were there, because that wasn't the reason why we did it.
Right.
So yeah, I would say the vast majority of young evangelicals that support Israel, they do it, especially in these times, because supporting Israel now is such a political thing, or it's become so politicized that they really do understand Scripture, they understand Jewish history, they understand Jewish indigeneity, whether it's the legal aspect of the land and all those things. And I think most pros or Christians my age and around my age are really informed about what's happening, and their stance really comes from a very informed place, to a point where they wouldn't even have to quote Scripture if they're debating Israel with someone. And that's kind of where I've seen that the movement grow on the pro-Israel side, which is encouraging.
That is very encouraging to hear that. Joshua, let's talk about another elephant in the room, and that is the city Jerusalem. This part of the poll completely shocked me, but in a good way. So let me explain myself, because only 28.4% of respondents believe that Jerusalem should be the capital of, I'm sorry, 28% believe that the Palestinian state, that the capital of Jerusalem should not have a section for the so-called capital of the Palestinian state. 71.6% said, again, these are these same young evangelical Christians, 71.6% said that Jerusalem should remain entirely the capital of Israel. Now, to me, these kids, 28%, support Israel, 42% said we're undecided, and 24% said we stand with the Palestinians. However, you have this question in the same survey. 28.4 said Palestinians should have a capital in Jerusalem, but 71% said no. Jerusalem belongs to the Jews, to Israel, and they do not believe Jerusalem should be divided. What do you think about those numbers? To me, that's shocking, considering everywhere else the kids landed in this survey.
Absolutely. I think that there's still and to be a little bit sarcastic, there's still a lot of work that the propagandists have to do on this front, because you can't extract Jerusalem from Israel. And I think that even amongst the Christians that don't support Israel, or they find Israel to be suspect or sketchy, or whatever the reasons are, Jerusalem, Zion, still rings true in a lot of Christians, that even if they believe that, on the political front, I don't support Zionism because, the people say, no, I don't support political Zionism, I support cultural, whatever. And
Right.
But there's this sense of, okay, you can't, and Jerusalem has, whether it's archaeology, there's so many things that speak to Israel's history there. Not that in the rest of the country it doesn't, but
Right.
There really is, I think, so strong of a tie there, that it's still, even amongst Christians who don't support Israel, they still see Jerusalem. I mean, we talk about the New Jerusalem in Revelation. We talk about, we even, for those who've gone to Israel, even if they've gone on a trip that was, not pro-Israel, there's something about Jerusalem that it's easier for them to see that, no, this is God's holy city. And this is where the Jewish people lived. It is fascinating. I mean, it is a little bit surprising to me too.
Yeah.
But I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah, nearly half of the respondents admitted to having very limited or no knowledge of the Arab Israeli conflict. And considering most of these young adults are in college, and you would expect that they are in some sort of young adult program at their church, that is surprising. Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, suggested Israel should prioritize the passionate and unequivocal support of evangelical Christians over that of American Jews, who are disproportionately among our critics. To me, that is shocking. I really think, going back to that poll about Jerusalem, you brought up the New Jerusalem, you brought up Zion. I believe that these kids, although they may not have a lot of knowledge about Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict, political knowledge, I think that, again, this demographic, these kids were in Sunday school, they were in Mother's Day Out, they were in Vacation Bible School. They heard the stories about, David and Goliath, and they heard the stories of Queen Esther and Haman. These stories we should never discount, being a Sunday school teacher, because those little stories that you read to these young impressionable minds will remain with them for a lifetime. And that is why I believe that there was such a disparity in that survey with these young evangelical kids. But I'm amazed at the number, how quickly the number dropped, but it shows us clearly, Joshua, that we still have a lot of work to do. You have an incredible ministry and organization. And before we wrap up our interview today, I really would love for you to talk a little bit about what you're doing and how our audience can get in touch with you and how they can follow your work, get involved with your work. Tell us a little bit about the organization that you are the head of.
Absolutely. So the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel is an organization my father started in 2013, and we've been going ever since. It originally started as just a content organization. We provided content and media resources to other organizations. The past couple of years, the past few years now, we have been doing a lot more, being a lot more active on our own front, speaking and writing, and we have a podcast now and different programs that we put together. One of those programs is called Peace, our Plan for Education, Advocacy, and Community Engagement. And that is a program where we essentially take young people. We pick a certain number of young people from different cities in this country, and young Black leaders, whether they're community leaders, young pastors, leaders in the political space, and we vet them, we interview them, and then we take them on this semester-long journey, if you will, where we have teachers come in, we do this curriculum, we take them to Israel, and then after that we put them back, we place them back in their cities, and we help them facilitate a relationship with the Jewish communities in their city, through these community centers. And so, which that piece is the most important, because we are helping them to kind of foster that community, and also for the people who've never been to Israel in their communities, they can actually get a piece of it there in those cities. And that's the vision that God had given my dad, and it's a long-term vision, but it's to create change culturally and to kind of shift the pendulum, and I think that not only is it important, it's very much needed. God had also, as he was giving my dad the vision and he gave it to us, he also gave me just ideas for our specific curriculum. We talk about biblical Israel, we talk about the civil rights movement and Zionism, we talk about we talk about the legal case for Israel, we talk about what's going on in Israel right now, the Ethiopian Jewish community. We even talk about what's happening right now on the African continent when it comes to modern day slavery, and how with the Arab slave trade of Africans, because even though that's not directly linked to Israel, it's for us. We feel that it's a very important piece, especially for young Black Americans, to understand what's happening on the continent,
Yes.
and then to also understand how Israel actually, with all the great work Israel does in Africa, how they could do much more if slavery was abolished in these countries like Libya and Nigeria and Mauritania and Sudan. And so, we are effective, or this program, we are seeking to raise up strong Zionists, but also very deeply rooted leaders that will go out and affect change in whatever spheres they're in. And so that's what peace is, and we're really excited to get it started. I mean, it's going to be we're just a few weeks away now from the vetting process, and we'll begin our first semester this fall.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And it sounds like after reviewing this poll, you've got your work cut out for you. God bless you, Joshua. Thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. So tell us where we can find you. Do you have a website? Are you on social media?
We are all over social media. So anywhere on social media, you can search at IBSI Now, IBSI Now. You'll find us anywhere. And then our website is ibsi-now.org. And you can find our website there. You can give. There's a place for people to contribute. You can set up monthly donations to help us with our peace program, and also with the whole of our organization and all the work that we're doing. And join our mailing lists, because we update people regularly on what we're doing and how we're continuing to move forward in this call that God has given us.
That's fantastic. God bless you. Joshua, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I look forward to having you back on the program to discuss this issue of Holocaust education in America and why we cannot allow misinformation to confuse our children about the critical race theory and the rising threat of anti-Semitism. Again, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the biblical truth. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to warn our brethren about these truths. How will God judge the Christians for standing by as the world stood by and was silent? Even Christian leaders bear false witness against our brother Jacob. We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. And the watchmen, ladies and gentlemen, were to alert the people, the inhabitants of the city, when they saw the enemy advancing. And if the watchman failed to alert the inhabitants of the city and any innocent blood was shed, it was required of that watchman. But if the watchman alerted the community and they chose to do nothing, their bloodshed would be upon their own head. And as a watchman, you can sound the alarm and warn others by sharing this podcast with your family and friends. The information that Joshua shared with us is very important, ladies and gentlemen. It's a truth that has to get out, especially to our African American, our Black brothers and sisters in the faith, so that they know the truth. In the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he said, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act." In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about the conflict in the Middle East, the rising threat of anti-Semitism in the U.S. and around the world, and the indoctrination of America's children. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.